The first time my neighbor knocked on my door at 11 at night, she wasn't wearing shoes, and she was holding a bottle of wine like it owed her money. That should have been my first warning. It wasn't. I'm Owen Castellano, 31. I fix HVAC systems for a living, which means I spend my days crawling through attics in Sacramento heat that would make a lesser man reconsider his life choices. My neighbor, Mara Delgado, was 28, a hospice nurse, and the kind of woman who could deliver devastating honesty in a voice so calm you didn't notice you'd been gutted until 10 minutes later. We'd lived next door to each other for almost 2 years. Thin walls, shared driveway, the occasional wave while getting the mail. That was the whole relationship. Polite, distant, exactly how I liked it, because the last time I'd let a neighbor become anything more than a neighbor, I'd ended up selling a house to escape the fallout. So when Mara stood on my porch that night, wine bottle in one hand, the other hand pressed flat against her forehead like she was holding her skull together, I should have said goodnight and closed the door. "Owen," she said, "I need you to marry me." I stood there for a second processing that sentence the way you process a smoke alarm going off for no reason. Confusing, loud. Definitely not something you can ignore. "I'm sorry, what?" "Not really. Obviously not really." She pushed past me into my living room like she lived there, which, again, should have alarmed me more than it did. For one night, my grandmother's 80th birthday is Saturday. My whole family will be there. And my mother has been telling everyone for 6 months that I'm engaged. "Are you engaged?" "No, Owen, that's the problem." I sat down slowly on the arm of my couch. "Okay, back up." She paced my living room in bare feet, wine bottle still in hand like a security blanket. 8 months ago I was seeing someone, Derek. I mentioned him to my mother exactly once, in passing, and by the following week she had told my aunt, my grandmother, and apparently a woman at her book club that I was, and I quote, "finally settling down." I broke up with Derek 2 weeks after that conversation happened. I never corrected her. I kept meaning to. Then Christmas happened, and I still didn't correct her. Then my mother told everyone I was engaged at Easter, because apparently in her mind settling down evolved into a full proposal over the course of 4 months, and I still didn't correct her, because my grandmother is turning 80 exactly once and I did not want to be the reason she cried into her cake. "So you let a lie live for 8 months. "I let a lie thrive for 8 months. There's a difference." I looked at her. She looked back at me with the specific desperation of a woman who had run out of better options and had landed, somehow, on her HVAC repairman neighbor. "Why me?" "Because you're the only man I know who won't ask for anything after." That landed harder than she probably meant it to. I didn't say anything for a second. That's not exactly a compliment. It's the highest compliment I have to give right now, Owen. Please, I should have said no. I want that on the record. I had rules about this exact situation. Rules I'd built 2 years earlier after a coworker's sister turned a casual thing into a slow-motion disaster that got me quietly transferred to a different crew. My rule was simple. Don't play pretend with people you actually have to see again. Emotional entanglement with proximity was a recipe I'd already burned my hand on once. But Mara was standing in my living room in bare feet with a bottle of wine and a look on her face that said she'd already imagined every version of Saturday going wrong. And something in me, something stupid and warm and entirely unprofessional, wanted to fix it. Fixing things was, after all, my whole personality. "One night," I said. "One night. I have conditions." "Of course you do. We need a story. Consistent. Because your family is going to interrogate us like we robbed a bank." My family invented interrogation, Owen. My Aunt Priscilla once made my cousin's fiancé recite their entire relationship timeline at a baby shower. Great. So we rehearse. "Tonight? Tonight." She sat down across from me, uncorked the wine without asking, and poured 2 glasses like she'd already decided this was happening whether I agreed or not. "How long have we been together?" she asked. 8 months, since that's apparently the going rumor. Where'd we meet? I thought about it. The truth. Next door neighbors. That's suspiciously believable. It's suspiciously true. We don't need to invent anything. We just need to add romance to something that already happened. She considered that, swirling her wine. Fine. We met when you fixed my air conditioner. I did fix your air conditioner. Last July. You also yelled at my thermostat. Your thermostat was possessed. I stand by that. She almost smiled. Okay. First date? Do we need one? My grandmother will absolutely ask. She's turning 80, not senile. I thought about the last 2 years, the small collisions of our lives, the mail mix-ups, the one time her power went out and she knocked on my door looking for candles. The night your power went out. Mara went still. That wasn't a date. It's our date now. I showed up looking for candles in pajama pants with a hole in them. I remember the hole. Her eyebrows lifted. You remember the hole in my pajama pants. I remember you sat on my couch for 3 hours because your street was dark and mine wasn't, and we ended up talking about your worst patient story until 2 in the morning, and I thought, this is the most interesting person on this block, and then I told myself that thought was inconvenient and went back to minding my business. The room got quiet in a way that hadn't been part of the rehearsal. You thought that, she said slowly. I think a lot of things I don't act on. It's a skill. She looked at her wine glass instead of at me. That's a good skill to have around me, apparently. Apparently. She cleared her throat and flipped to a mental new page. First kiss. I raised an eyebrow. Is this necessary? My cousin Deb will ask. Deb has no concept of boundaries and an encyclopedic memory for details. Fine. Tell her it's private. That will make her worse. I looked at Mara. She had one knee tucked under her on my couch. Wine in hand, hair falling loose from whatever twist she'd had it in earlier. And for a second the pretend conversation felt like it was standing dangerously close to a real one. The kitchen, I said. Yours. You just moved the couch by yourself even though I told you to wait for me, and you were annoyed I said I told you so, and I said something about how stubborn people end up crushed under furniture, and you laughed even though you were mad, and I kissed you before either of us thought better of it. Mara didn't say anything for a moment. That's oddly specific. I'm committed to the craft. You're describing something that never happened like you've thought about it happening. I looked at my own wine glass. I fix HVAC systems, Mara. I don't get a lot of practice being subtle. She set her glass down slowly. Owen. Yeah. Why are you actually doing this? The real reason. Not the neighborly favor reason. I could have deflected. I'd built an entire life around deflecting, around being the reliable, uncomplicated guy who showed up, fixed the thing, and left before anyone got the wrong idea. But Mara had bare feet and a bottle of wine and 8 months of buried feelings sitting quietly in my chest, and I was tired of being careful for reasons that had stopped making sense a while ago. Because I like you, I said, and I've liked you for longer than I've admitted to myself, and pretending to be your husband for one night is the closest I've gotten to actually asking, so I figured I'd take it. Mara stared at me. The wine bottle sat forgotten on the coffee table between us. That's not fake fiancé talk, she said quietly. No, it's not. Owen, this is going to be a mess. Probably. My mother is going to plan a real wedding within the hour. Also probable. And you're still saying yes? I said yes 20 minutes ago. I'm just now admitting why. She laughed, short and startled, covering her mouth with one hand. God, this was supposed to be a simple favor. Nothing involving your family sounds simple, based on tonight's testimony alone. Fair. She looked at me for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes. Okay. We rehearse the rest tomorrow. Ring shopping included, apparently, since I told my mother it was a modest solitaire. You gave the fake ring a description? I panicked in March. It escalated. We'll find a modest solitaire. Thank you. She stood, gathering the wine bottle, suddenly looking exhausted in the specific way of someone who'd been carrying a secret so long that finally saying it out loud had drained her. At my door, she paused. Owen. Yeah. I wasn't lying about liking that you don't ask for anything after. But I think I might want you to ask for something this time. She left before I could answer, and I stood in my doorway for a long time after her porch light clicked off, feeling something in my chest that had nothing to do with pretending. Saturday arrived with the kind of dry Sacramento heat that made every fake engagement feel slightly more dramatic than it needed to be. I picked out a ring from a costume jewelry shop that specialized, apparently, in exactly this kind of arrangement. The woman behind the counter didn't even blink when I explained the situation, just handed me 3 options and said, "Second one reads real from 4 feet away. That's the going distance at most family events." Mara wore blue, the kind of blue that made her look like she'd stepped directly out of a magazine spread about California summer weddings. And when she opened her door and saw me in the one blazer I owned that didn't have drywall dust ground into the seams, she went quiet for a second longer than the moment required. "You clean up," she said. "I own one blazer. Please don't examine it too closely." I wasn't going to examine the blazer. I handed her the ring box. She opened it, looked at the modest solitaire inside, and exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since Tuesday. "It's perfect." The woman at the shop said this one reads real from 4 feet. That's oddly specific expertise. She seemed to have done this before. Mara slid the ring on. It fit, somehow, which felt like either luck or fate, and I decided not to examine that too closely either. "Rules," I said. 1. If you want to leave, we leave, no explanations required. 2. We don't invent details beyond what we rehearsed. Improvising in front of your Aunt Priscilla sounds like a legal liability. 3. I hesitated. If your mother starts planning an actual wedding, I reserve the right to look mildly panicked. Mara laughed, real and unguarded. Deal. The drive to her grandmother's house took 20 minutes, most of them silent, both of us watching the ring catch light on her hand every time she rested it on her knee. When we pulled into the driveway, already crowded with cars belonging to relatives I was about to meet for the first time as someone's fiancé, Mara reached over and took my hand before I'd even turned off the engine. "Ready?" she asked. "No. Let's go anyway." Her grandmother's house was full before we walked in the door. The specific chaos of a family that loved loudly and argued just as loudly, often about the same subjects in the same conversation. Mara's mother, Renata, spotted us the second we crossed the threshold and made a sound that could only be described as a controlled shriek. "There she is. There's my girl. And look at him, Mara, he looks even better than the pictures." "What pictures?" I murmured to Mara. "I may have sent her a photo of you getting my mail once." She murmured back. It escalated. Everything escalated. "Welcome to my family." Renata pulled Mara into a hug fierce enough to threaten the ring's structural integrity, then turned that same intensity on me. "Owen, I've heard so much about you. Good things, I hope." Mara said you fixed her air conditioner and then fixed her heart. I don't know if she meant that as a joke. Mara's face went the color of the punch bowl behind her. "Mom, I'm just repeating what you told me in March." "I did not say that in March." "You absolutely said that in March, sweetheart." I wrote it down. I bit back a laugh and squeezed Mara's hand, and she squeezed back so hard I felt it in my knuckles. A silent apology for the chaos I'd apparently signed up for months before I knew I had. The grandmother, Dolores, held court in the center of the living room in a chair that had clearly been designated as her throne for the evening, and when Mara led me over to make introductions, the old woman looked me up and down with the unhurried assessment of someone who had outlived several husbands and had opinions about all of them. "So you're the one," Dolores said. "I am, ma'am. You don't look like much." "I get that a lot." That earned a laugh, sharp and delighted. "Good. The ones who look like much are usually the most trouble." She patted the seat beside her. "Sit. Tell me how you proposed." My daughter's version keeps changing and I don't trust a single word of it. I glanced at Mara. Mara's expression said, in no uncertain terms, that I was on my own for this one, and also that she trusted me completely, which was somehow both comforting and terrifying at the same time. It was small, I said, choosing my words the way I'd choose a wire in a panel I didn't fully trust. No big production. We were on her porch. It had been raining, and the power in her neighborhood went out again like it does every summer, and I said something about how I'd gotten used to fixing whatever broke around her, and I realized I didn't want that to stop, ever, so I asked. Dolores studied me for a long moment. Mara, beside me, had gone very still. That's a good answer, Dolores said finally. Better than my own husband gave me, and he had 60 years to improve it. I had less time to prepare, ma'am. Clearly you didn't need it. She turned to Mara. I like him. I like him too, Mara said quietly, and something about the way she said it, soft, almost surprised at herself, made my chest do something complicated. Dinner unfolded in courses of casseroles and unsolicited advice, Cousin Deb demanding to know if I snored, and Uncle interrogating me about my job with genuine curiosity that turned into a 20-minute conversation about ductwork that nobody else at the table wanted to be part of. Renata crying twice, once during the toast and once during a story about Mara's childhood that had nothing to do with me at all. I found myself relaxing into the role in a way I hadn't expected, not performing a fiancé so much as discovering what it might actually feel like to be one. Mara's knee found mine under the table early and stayed there. I didn't move away. It was during dessert that things nearly fell apart. Deb, 3 glasses of wine deep and completely without a filter, leaned across the table with the gleeful energy of someone about to detonate a rumor. So when's the wedding? Because Aunt Renata's been talking venues since March, and I heard you two haven't even set a date, which is, frankly, suspicious for a couple that's been engaged since spring. The table quieted just enough for the question to land with weight. Mara's hand found mine under the table, gripping tight. We're taking our time, I said. Getting the important things right first. Like what? Like making sure the people we love are part of it the way they deserve to be. That takes planning. You don't rush something you want to get exactly right. Deb seemed satisfied with that, mercifully, and the conversation moved on to whether Dolores's cake had too much rum in it, which it did by unanimous vote. But Mara looked at me across the table with an expression I hadn't seen from her before. Something unguarded. Something that looked a lot like the thing I'd been trying not to name for 2 years. We left around 9, after Dolores hugged me goodbye with surprising strength and told me to take care of her granddaughter or answer to her personally, and Renata cried a 3rd time, and Cousin Deb tried to get my number for reasons that remained genuinely unclear. Mara was quiet in the car, turning the ring on her finger, watching the streetlights slide across the windshield. You were really good in there, she said finally. I had good material to work with. The porch story, the rain, the power going out. That wasn't rehearsed. No, you didn't tell me you were going to say that. I didn't plan to. It just came out true. She was quiet for another block. Owen, can I ask you something and have you actually answer honestly? Yeah. Was any of tonight fake for you? I pulled into her driveway before I answered, cutting the engine, letting the quiet of the neighborhood settle around us the way it did most nights. Except tonight there was a ring on her hand that neither of us had bothered mentioning we should probably take off. The ring's fake, I said. The story about how we met, that's true. The story about the porch, that's a version of something I've actually thought about doing for real. The part where I said I didn't want to stop fixing things around you, ever, that wasn't fake either. I think somewhere around the 4th month of living next door to you, I stopped thinking of you as my neighbor and started thinking of you as something I looked forward to seeing, and I never said anything because you seemed happy with Derek, and then you weren't seeing Derek anymore, and I still didn't say anything because I'd built this whole rule about not risking things with people I actually had to keep seeing. Mara sat very still, hands folded in her lap, ring catching the porch light through the windshield. That's a lot to admit in a driveway, she said quietly. I've had 8 months of practice not admitting it. Figured I'd get it all out at once. Owen. Yeah. I don't want to give the ring back. I looked at her. That's a problem, considering it's from a costume jewelry shop and cost $40. I don't care where it's from. She turned to face me fully, one leg tucked under her, exactly like she'd sat on my couch 3 nights earlier when this whole thing started. I've spent 2 years telling myself you were just the reliable neighbor who fixed things, because it was easier than admitting I looked forward to seeing your truck in the driveway more than I looked forward to almost anything else in my week. And tonight you sat with my terrifying grandmother and told a story about a night that actually happened between us like it meant something, and it did mean something, and I don't want tonight to have an expiration date. The porch light buzzed faintly above us. Somewhere down the street a dog barked twice and went quiet. So what are you saying? I said, even though I already knew. I'm saying I don't want to give the ring back tomorrow, or the day after. I'm saying I think I've been in love with my neighbor for longer than I've been willing to admit, and it took pretending to marry him to figure out I wasn't pretending at all. I reached over and covered her hand with mine, the fake ring warm from the drive. Then don't give it back, I said. We'll get you a real one eventually. This one can just be the practice round. She laughed, wet and unsteady, and leaned across the console to kiss me, soft at first, then not soft at all, and it didn't feel like acting. It felt like the natural conclusion of 2 years of careful distance finally collapsing under its own weight. When we pulled apart, she rested her forehead against mine. My family is going to be insufferable when they find out this became real. Your family already thinks it's real. They think we're already engaged, Owen. We have to actually catch up to the lie now. That seems like a reasonable problem to have. You're taking this well. I fix things for a living. Turns out I'm equally comfortable building something from scratch. She smiled against my mouth. That's the most romantic thing you've ever compared to plumbing. HVAC, actually. I'd never compare romance to plumbing. Have some standards. We sat in my truck in her driveway for another hour after that, not because we needed to, but because neither of us wanted to be the one to open the door and end the night, and eventually her porch light clicked off automatically on its timer, and we both laughed at the absurdity of the entire evening, of pretending our way into something that had apparently been true the whole time. The following weeks moved differently than I expected. I thought there'd be some adjustment period, some awkward renegotiation of boundaries now that fake had folded into real, but instead everything just settled, the way water finds its level. Mara started leaving her porch light on for me specifically instead of on its timer. I started leaving my truck parked at an angle that made it easier for her to back out in the morning without me having to think about it, the kind of small automatic consideration that happens between people who've decided, without discussing it formally, that they're building a life around each other's small routines. Her mother called twice a week to discuss wedding logistics for an engagement that had, technically, existed for exactly 1 dinner before becoming real. Dolores called once to ask if I'd fixed anything interesting lately, and seemed personally offended when I described a particularly stubborn furnace repair in insufficient detail. Cousin Deb texted Mara asking for my number 3 separate times, for reasons that remained, mercifully, unclear and unpursued. 3 months after her grandmother's birthday, I took Mara to the same porch where the story I'd told Dolores had first happened, minus the rain, minus the power outage, and I got down on one knee with a ring that wasn't from a costume jewelry shop this time, and asked her the question I'd apparently been building toward since the night her power first went out and she showed up at my door in pajama pants with a hole in them, looking for candles and finding, without either of us realizing it at the time, something considerably more permanent. She said yes before I'd finished the sentence, which felt appropriate, given how the whole thing started. At our wedding, Dolores gave a toast that mentioned, with visible satisfaction, that she'd known from the moment she met me that the story I told about the porch and the rain had been more true than either of us was admitting at the time. Renata cried through the entire ceremony and most of the reception. Cousin Deb finally got my number, but only because Mara insisted on adding her to the family group chat, where she remains, to this day, completely without a filter. We kept the costume ring. It sits in a small box on our dresser, the one that read real from 4 feet according to the woman who sold it to me. A reminder that sometimes the thing you build to convince other people ends up being the thing that finally convinces you. People ask us sometimes how we met, and the honest answer is boring. 2 years of thin walls and shared driveways and polite waves over the mailbox. But the answer we actually tell people, the one that gets repeated at family dinners and holiday gatherings, is the one about the rain and the power outage and the porch, the story that started as a lie I told to a stranger's grandmother and ended up being the truest thing I'd ever said out loud. Sometimes the biggest lie you tell turns out to be the moment you finally stop lying to yourself. What would you have done if your neighbor showed up at your door asking you to pretend to be married for one night? Would you have said yes? And would you have been as surprised as I was to find out the pretending wasn't pretending at all? Tell me your story in the comments below.